Chapter 31 of Another's Family. During the noon meal, Chu Qingju and He Hung sat on either side of Jing Gaifei. The palace maids carried trays in like a school of fish and served them as they washed and dried their hands. Jing Gaifei might have had the intentions to elevate Wei Ranzhuang, but due to Wei Ranzhuang's status, she couldn't sit with the three of them. Chu Qingju looked at Wei Ranzhuang as she stood being Jing Gaifei. This Wei Mimi that returned from outside to Jing City had a good appearance, innocent and clean. Her manner as she obediently stood behind Jing Gaifei was also very attractive. It was just in this kind of ancient era that it was very likely for cousins to get together. Chu Qingju stole a look at He Hung and guessed as to whether if he had any desire. Taking the handkerchief that a palace maid handed over, Chu Qingju's gaze scanned over He Hung. The other person didn't seem to have any interest in Wei Ranzhuang. She smiled and watched as dish after dish was brought in. After the noon meal, Wei Ranzhuang accompanied Jing Gaifei as she returned to the inner rooms for a short rest. Chu Qingju and He Hung went to one of the side rooms. There was a full set of furniture and other essentials in the side room. Chu Qingju even managed to see that a page of awkwardly written characters hanging on the wall. It looked like the writings of a young child. He Hung saw Chu Qingju was looking at the words and coughed before explaining, "This was the room I lived in when I was young and lived with Mufi. Only after I was 6 did I move to the side hall. When I was 10, I moved to my own palace." Chu Qingju looked at the date under the characters, the 17th year of Qingdi. At that time, He Hung would have only been 5 years old. She took her gaze back and smiled. Wang Yi's talents are above others. From such a set of characters, Qingju can see talent above others. It's your kin that are above others. He Hung smiled and sat down on the bed. "Come rest for a while on the bed. It will be very late tonight before we can return back to our fu." Chu Qingju, under the service of servants, took down the hair ornaments and the decorated outer robe. After everyone had left the room, she crisply sat down on the bed. She stared at him and said, "If my kin aren't good, I wouldn't have fallen for Wang yet." To this kind of response, he couldn't help but laugh. He Hung had to admit he liked hearing this. In the end he could only press the person onto the bed. "You married me because Fu Huang decreed married. How was it you fell for me?" Chu Qingju wrapped the blanket around her and muttered, "Fell later, then." He Hung looked at the person who had buried her head into the blankets. The corners of his lips couldn't help but curl up, his eyes unconsciously becoming softer. The nap that Jing Gaifei took at noon wasn't long. It wasn't a bit more than an hour when she woke. She stood from the bed and looked at Wei Ranzhuang, who stood to one side, allowing the palace maids to put on the clothing and adornments needed for the evening banquet. Seeing Wei Ranzhuang come forward to help style her hair, Jing Gaifei stopped her. Looking at herself in the mirror and the lingering traces of beauty, Jing Gaifei asked in a cool tone, "Ranzhuang, do you know why Ben Gong let you enter the palace?" Wei Ranzhuang had never interacted with Jing Gaifei for a long length of time, so when she heard Jing Gaifei ask this, she became nervous. She answered with a bit of embarrassment, "Niece doesn't know." Picking out a peach blossom hairpin made from rubies out of boxes of ornaments, Jing Gaifei said with a calm expression, "I suppose that before you entered the palace, your mother had already said a lot to you. But some things Ben Gong has to say clearly to you. Duan Wang is an adult. Ben Gong cannot make his decisions for him, and doesn't want to force him into accepting any decisions. Lay rest to your wishes now." Wei Ranzhuang paled and she gripped her fingers together for a beat before whispering, "Gumu, I don't ask for much, I just want to remain at Biao Ji's side." Finishing, her face became red. Hearing this, Jing Gaifei smiled, whether in disdain or something else. She raised an eyebrow as she looked at the young girl standing at her side. "You've just seen Hunger for just this little while and you want to spend your entire life with him." Young girls were easily influenced by a man's status, appearance, and conduct. They didn't care what his personality was like, how his family was. They thought it was true love and would rush in. As to the end result, they would never think about it. Wei Ranchuang's face became even more flushed and buried her head slightly, not rejecting Jing Gaifei's words. Then what do you think about Duan Wangfei? When Jing Gaifei mentioned her Erxifu, she felt her temple throb. Duan Wangfei is more beautiful than any other. Wei Ranchuang bit her lips and squeezed out, I don't want to compete with Wangfei, and doesn't dare to. You can't compete with her. Jing Gaifei personally drew her eyebrows and she was merciless when she looked at Wei Ranchuang again. I don't want you to become a Kishi. If you are willing, I will definitely find you a good family. Her Erxifu might not be what she wanted, but she had to admit that her niece couldn't even compare to Chu Qingju. Appearance, family, composure, conduct and even the special traits that aroused interest and affection in men. Wei Ranchuang was drastically weaker than Chu Qingju. As a key, she had nothing that could outcompete the wife. What would she use to compete for a man's favor? Wei Ranchuang's face became even paler but she refused to speak. Jing Gaifei looked at her state and furrowed her eyebrows. She didn't speak further. Plainly speaking, it wasn't her actual brother's daughter. Since the other wouldn't listen to her persuasions, she was lazy to speak more. Coming out of the inner room, Jing Gaifei saw that no one was in the outer room and asked, have they not risen yet? Ding Mama knew who Niang was asking for and responded, it probably was that Wang Ye and Wang Fei would have risen early today and be tired. They haven't risen. Newbie will go now to summon them. That's fine, let them sleep. I don't know how late this will go tonight. Jing Gaifei waved her hand and took a drink of tea to help her focus. That woman, Shu Gaifei, is most likely going to be troubling Ben Gong again tonight. Make sure that everybody who is accompanying Ben Gong tonight to the banquet to be careful. Ding Mama confirmed. Her Niang had been locked in struggle with Shu Gaifei for many years. After so long, they held a mutual hate. Thankfully, Wang Ye was a good child. Otherwise, based on how the emperor favored only Shu Gaifei, Niang would have been at a disadvantage. As the two were talking, they saw He Hung and Chu Qingju walk in holding hands. Jing Gaifei stopped the topic and saw her Erxifu looked at her with amazement. She felt very satisfied and opened, you've just woken, drink some tea to wake up. After a bit, use some refreshments. At this type of banquet, the tendency was to go hungry. Chu Qingju understood and after she took a drink of tea, she complimented, Mufi's dress is very beautiful. Because the other's compliment was too straightforward and unskilled, Jing Gaifei held a teacup and explained, this dress was specially made by the clothing department. It took many days. It's natural it wouldn't be bad looking. Other families' Erxifu speaks in twists and turns. Their compliments were classic and literary. But why was it that when it came to her, it was such a bare sentence? Even the desire to show off was halved. Jing Gaifei signaled that she wasn't happy. Wei Ranchuang saw the situation and came forward to exchange Jing Gaifei's tea for a hotter one. She smiled, the cranes on Aunt's dress are as though they came from heaven. I wonder how they embroidered it, at one glance, one can't tear their gaze away. Look at her, look. Jing Gaifei glanced at Chu Qingju and held the new cup of tea. She smiled and declared, the things that Ben Gong wants them to make, they naturally will make it well. Otherwise, there's no use in keeping them. Gumu is of high status, they wouldn't dare do you a disservice. When Wei Ranchuang finished, she said to Chu Qingju, the craftsman on Seo's dress is also very skilled. It must have also taken many days. Chu Qingju squinted her eyes in a smile as she looked at Wei Ranchuang, us members of the imperial family, we do have to take more care at these times. Her good cousin wasn't a pure harmless little white bunny. Wei Ranchuang's smile dimmed slightly, yes, people like me, we don't get to use these things. That's true, Chu Qingju nodded, girls like you, it doesn't matter what you wear. There's no need to take a lot of care. Her face dimming, Wei Ranchuang felt that the matter-of-fact tone of the other made her heart feel as though it was blocked. A beat later she forced a smile and said, Seo has a noble status, and naturally has to take more care. There's no way around it, I can't shame my Wang Ye now. Chu Qingju sighed in helplessness and turned towards He Hung. Right, Wang Ye? He Hung nodded and without looking at Wei Ranchuang, he admitted, you are right. A man with ability, usually they wouldn't care how much women spent and how valuable was what she wore. There were only two types of men that criticized women for being extravagant. One type was the type that had no ability. The other type was he had a change of heart. Chu Qingju didn't know if He Hung had a heart, but she did know that He Hung was very able. Seeing the interactions between the two, the dimness on Wei Ranchuang's face became more real, but she had no way of saying something else. She could only force a smile and comment, Gage and Sayaseo have such a good relationship. He Hung slowly followed with this, I and your Sayaseo are husband and wife. We naturally have good feelings for each other. Wei Ranchuang didn't speak again. Jing Gaifei looked calmly at this scene and put the teacup in her hand to one side. She motioned for Ding Mama to change her cup before announcing, the kitchen should have finished making the refreshments now. Ben Gong will let them serve it. Erxifu, when we get to the banquet later, don't drink too much. If she had to leave in the middle of the banquet, it would shame her. Chu Qingju nodded, Erxifu will remember, thanks, Mufiai, for the reminder. Finishing, she gave a grateful look of Mufiai, you are such a good person. Jing Gaifei jerked her lips and felt that she didn't want to talk to her again. When the sky darkened, Jing Gaifei finally opened again, Hunger, you go to the front hall. Ben Gong will take Erxifu to the rear hall. He Hung stood and performed a greeting. He gave Chu Qingju a reassuring look before he walked out the door of Zhongjing Palace. Let's go, Erxifu. Jing Gaifei touched the biao inserted in her hair as she stood, later, follow Ben Gong and don't speak freely. She kept on feeling if she didn't give a few more warnings, she would be too worried. Chu Qingju came up to hold her hand and smiled. She affirmed, Erxi knows. Chapter 32 At the Banquet. The imperial banquets of Dalong dynasty were always set in Zhaoyang Great Hall. Therefore, the entire hall was very large. Even the decorations were full of grandeur, carrying the intimidation and prestige of the imperial family. In the very front of the hall there was a gold-inlaid dragon and phoenix sandalwood table. Underneath that on the right and left was a row of 8-person square tables. When Chu Qingju walked into the Great Hall, she found that everyone sitting on the left side was male and the right side was filled with women. On the first table on the right, there were already people seated. Chu Qingju examined them. Both Wei Qingyi and Qin Bailu were each accompanying a beautiful woman. These two must be Shu Gaifei and Wen Gipan. The pretty woman sitting beside them in plainer attire must be Cheng Wang's birth mother and Gipan. Jing Gaifei carried a smile as she walked forward and allowed Chu Qingju to hold her to sit down on the seat beside Shu Gaifei. She pointed to the spot next to her, Erxifu, sit down too. Chu Qingju smiled and bowed to the others. She addressed the others present, greetings to Shu Gaifei, Gipan, Wen Gipan. Gipan was Cheng Wang's birth mother and looked like a very gentle woman. She looked similar to her neighbor, Wen Gipan, but Chu Qingju found that Gipan had a very warm visage overall, unlike the warm exterior of Wen Gipan. Lao Er's wife doesn't have to be so courteous, sit down, Shu Gaifei smiled, you became sick not long after you married, so Ben Gong hadn't seen you close up before. Now that I've seen you, I understand. Such a good Erxifu. No wonder Jija has hidden you all this time and not let you out. When Jing Gaifei hear this, her eyebrow twitched and she gave a thin smile. She divulged sarcastically, Ben Gong's Erxifu doesn't like going out all the time. Ben Gong can't do anything about it. She's just dull, not like your Lao Sans. Mimi, don't tease her. She had an Erxifu that like fluttering about and joins in everything. She dared to criticize her Erxifu, she should look at herself first. Wanting to pick at the relationship between her and Erxifu wasn't that easy. The smile on Shu Gaifei's face became uglier by a few fractions. She glanced at Qin Bai Lu who was sitting beside her and, with a mirthless smile, she replied, Jia is too funny. They all come from noble families, they are all virtuous and intelligent. That's true, Jing Gaifei allowed a palace maid to top up her tea. She turned and continued, Lao San's wife comes from a well-educated family, she must be one of those rare talented girls. I don't dare lay claim to talented, Qing Bai Lu stood and bowed, Jing Gaifei Niang is overestimating Erxi. Jing Gaifei looked at the pale white dress she was wearing and looked at the complicated red tight-girdled wide-sleeved dress embroidered with a luan. Even if it was a bit wasteful, for the end of the year, the red did look more celebratory. Nguyen silently watched and occasionally sipped tea. Her own Erxifo hadn't married in yet, she wasn't as high in status as these two so she didn't have any desire to compete. But Lao Er's wife, she was truly good-looking, too good-looking. Before this girl had married, she had seen her in the palace but she hadn't been this attractive. The emperor has arrived, the empress has arrived. The two Gaifei Niang that had been throwing verbal darts simultaneously stopped talking and respectfully stood, then slowly knelt down. Chu Qingju, who was watching on the side, sighed in amazement. Look at how familiar they were with their duties, they could change at the blink of an eye. As Jing Gaifei knelt, and hearing the Taijian call for a kowtow, Chu Qingju then helped Jing Gaifei stand. Taking advantage of this movement, she found that Jing Gaifei's eyes as she looked at the emperor were expressionless. She couldn't help but look at the man standing at the highest place. The old man was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe, his swollen physique had turned a once handsome man to an average man. But just this kind of a man, he was the aim of all the thousands of machinations of the women in the Hugong, he was the one that wasted all of their youth and beauty. Today is the end of the year, you all don't have to be so courteous. Sit. Qingda Emperor waved his hand and sat down. He saw as the people kneeling at his feet shout 10,000 years 3 times before they dare sit down and the smile on his face became even more visible. A couple of claps, and women dressed in multicolored costumes streamed in and gave festive dances. The drinks and dishes came out like a stream of water. Chu Qingju looked at the plates of food and her mouth twitched. But seeing Jing Gaifei sitting like a mountain, in the end she didn't speak. No wonder Jing Gaifei told them to use refreshments before coming here. These dishes appeared beautiful but from the looks of it, they didn't have much warmth. In the winter, who liked eating this? Turning her head, she looked at the young women dancing in the middle of the hall, each bend of the waist and each wave of the arm full of flirtation. But all the people in the audience had a slight smile on their faces, the mirth at the corner of their lips was as though it was stamped on, not too much but not too little. After a dance, there came some boys and girls in costumes, singing about luck and good fortune. Chu Qingju wasn't interested and allowed Mu Jin to pick a piece of refreshment to waste time. Lao Das, why isn't your zhong'er here today? Shu Gaifei looked at Wei Qingyi, her voice full of regret, there are not many children in the palace, it's much too quiet. Gaifei Niang, zhong'er got a cold a few days ago. Erxi was worried that he would transfer the sickness to the valued persons if he came to the palace so he was left in the fu. He Zhong was Wei Qingyi's child. Usually, he was carefully protected so when she heard Shu Gaifei mention her child, her heart tightened. On her face, she only allowed a warm smile to appear, her voice full of respect as she promised, when he get better, Erxi will bring him in to greet Niang. So that's why, Shu Gaifei nodded and after she ordered somebody to take some medicine to Wei Qingyi, she smiled and commented, we should always be careful with children. It's been cold these past days. As a mother, you have to put more effort in. This attitude, it was as though she was the mistress. Sitting beside Wei Qingyi, Wei Giban didn't even say a word, a gentle smile hanging on her face. Wei Qingyi concurred. She turned her head to personally serve Wen Giban a 1,000-layer cake. Mufiai, taste this. Sweet yet not too sweet, it's good. The smile on Wen Giban's face became warmer. After 2 bits of the 1,000-layer cake, you don't have to be attending me constantly. Eat something yourself. If Mufei has eaten well, it is the good fortune of Erxifu. Wei Xian Qi put down her chopsticks and smiled as she poured Wen Giban a cup of plum flower wine. This wine doesn't go to the head, it's perfect to accompany the 1,000-layer cake. Lao Da's is very virtuous. The smile on Chu Gaifei's face became a few fractions fainter. She looked at Qin Bai Lu, who was sitting with a glass of wine, and felt her heart beat unevenly. She turned to look at Jing Gaifei and asked, "Jija, don't you think?" Jing Gaifei glanced at Chu Gaifei. She smiled and praised, "These Erxifu, they are all full of filial love. Mimi doesn't have to admire Wen Giban and forget your own good Erxi." She didn't feel good herself and wanted to drag her down as well. Did she think she had no brains? Qin Bai Lu knew that her popo wasn't happy and set down the wine cup. She turned to personally place Shu Gaifei a piece of crab meat into her bowl. Shu Gaifei made a slight bite before commenting, "This winter crab isn't as tender as autumn's. Such a big grab, it only looks good." Qin Bailu's hand tightened around the chopsticks. In the end she could only smile and suggest, "Mufei speaks the truth. Why don't we try this picked duck tongue? Erxi thinks it is acceptable." "No need," Shu Gaifei smiled, "you have a good time, Ben Gong doesn't have an appetite." Ben Gong sees that it seems pretty good. Jing Gaifei looked at Chu Qingju, "Erxifu, get some for Ben Gong to taste." Chu Qingju saw the other wanted to display her, so she could only smile and push back her sleeve to pick two for Jing Gaifei. She also considerately broke the soft bone at the end of the tongue. "Such a honest child, don't just pay attention to me." Jing Gaifei finished the duck's tongue and smiled to let the palace maid behind her serve Chu Qingju a bowl of soup. "Us women should drink more soup, there's many benefits." Chu Qingju gave a happy smile as she raised the bowl. She said in an intimate tone, "Thanks, Mufei." Then she buried her head to focus on obediently consuming the soup. Shu Gaifei looked at this scene of motherly and filial love and threw her eyes away with a snort. But her heart started to beat even less smoothly. Jing Gaifei used a handkerchief to wipe her lips in a very good mood. Only a stupid woman would make it difficult for her own Erxifu in front of others. "Whatever matter, go back to your own rooms to fight it out. Your Erxifu is a titled Wang Fei." This entire place was filled with noble matrons and titled ladies. If your Erxifu was shamed, as her popo, would you benefit? It was shaming your own son, and letting others laugh at you. At the men's side, the top right table was the four He brothers and a few old Wang Ye from the imperial family. But these old Wang Ye were very perceptive and courteous to the four. He Hung sat between He Yuan and He Qi, and conversed with everyone present with a smile on his face. He held himself with elegance and a majestic bearing. "Sid's good matter is coming up. You should drink a few more cups with your brothers today." He Qi raised the wine cup and called He Hung, "Come." Drunkenness had already started to make its way across He Ming's face, but he couldn't refuse his De Ji's request. He could only raise his wine cup with a painful expression, "Thanks De Ji. Didi will finish first." He Yuan's pale finger rubbed the rim of the cup. He looked at Lao Da's forthright manner as he finished toasting everyone at the table. He raised an eyebrow as he tapped the wine cup. "De Ji has a good capacity." "Haha, De Ji can't do anything else, but this capacity, I have." He Qi raised his hand to pat He Yuan's shoulder, the blow causing the wine in He Yuan's hand to splash out. "I can't drink delicately like you." Looking at his hand that had been splashed with wine, He Yuan disdainfully put down the wine cup. He took out a handkerchief to clean his hand before he retorted coldly, "Didi doesn't go to the restaurants and tea shops as often as De Ji, so my capacity for drinking naturally isn't as great as De Ji." As though he hadn't heard the underlying thrust in the words, He Qi chuckled, "Men cannot be unable to drink wine, don't you think so, Erd? It's not just men that can drink wine, and not all men would like drinking wine." He Hung smiled as he raised his cup to He Qi. "Occasionally drinking a few cups along is a relaxing thing, but it's better to avoid to drink like your life depended on it." Didi doesn't have the capacity that De Ji has. This cup is to salute De Ji. Finishing, he didn't care to see He Qi respond and threw back his head to drink to the bottom. He Yuan watched with cold eyes and sneered with disdain. He took the new cup that the Tajian served. Erd's words are rational. He Qi keep on smiling in a forthright manner but didn't keep toasting others. He quietly sat on his spot and started to eat. He Hung lowered his head and smiled as he swung the empty cup in his hand. Chapter 33 The first day of the new year at Wangfu. After the drinks and dishes were taken down, it was time for the tributes from each of the subordinate countries. Chu Qingju looked at the obedient diplomats and the matter-of-fact attitude of everybody else and suddenly understood what was might is right. As the Tajian finished reading the pages of the lists that the diplomats presented, she found that those who had a larger tribute had faces with color and those with few tributes were full of poverty, as though they wanted to kowtow to Qingde Emperor to express the helplessness they felt that they didn't have any more to offer. When these diplomats retreated, it had been more than an hour. Chu Qingju held a teacup and had a new insight into Delong dynasty. This mighty dynasty, it was akin to a holy land in the eyes of the surrounding little countries. Because of this, the likelihood that there would be an attack on Delong dynasty in the next few decades was very small. It was then no wonder that Qingde Emperor had such a weak personality. At this time, a heavy drum started. Chu Qingju saw the Emperor and Empress walk out of the Great Hall and kneel on the white stone platform outside the hall. As she followed everybody outside, she went into as daze as she knelt with Jing Gaifei. She listened as Qingde Emperor gave his prayers to the heaven. He seemed to be begging for good weather in the coming year and a good fulfilling life for the citizens. When the fireworks exploded above Chu Qingju's head, she finally woke up. Coincidentally, at this time the prayers of the emperor stopped. She supported Jing Gaifei to stand and retreat to one side. Then she heard the singing voices of the musicians and the chatter flow into her ear. She raised her head and saw the multicolored fireworks in the sky. She couldn't help but blink her eyes seemed sore and uncomfortable. Jing Gaifei also stared in a daze at the fireworks before lowering her head and informing, "Emperor and Empress have already returned to their palace. It's late now. You should return too." Finishing, she took a palace maid's hand. "Ben Gong is also tired. Mufi, Erxi will take you back." Chu Qingju held Jing Gaifei's hand. She saw tiredness between her brows and took the cape that Mujin had prepared to wrap around Jing Gaifei. "There's no need." Jing Gaifei looked at the red dress that Chu Qingju wore and her hand gently fell on the knot of the cape in front of her throat. "It's cold at night. You and Hunger should return early. This isn't far from Zhongjing Palace. Ben Gong will sit on the step carriage." Finishing, she waved her hand and dismissed Chu Qingju, walking away with the support of a palace maid. Chu Qingju stood for a while at the original spot before she let Mujin help her as she walked down the high white jade stairs. The long train of the dress flowed across the stone steps as though a stream of water had passed by. At the bottom of the stone steps, the four He brothers stood mutually a few steps away. He Yuan's face was icy. Behind him was an expressionless Qin Bai Lu. The two of them originally didn't have many feelings between them, but when the two had met, Qin Bai Lu acted as though she had been bullied. That was enough to make He Yuan flip his face, so the two of them stood an arm's length away with mutually frozen faces. Qin Bai Lu hated the fact that her popo had shamed her and was angry that He Yuan didn't treat her warmly. Originally she had been bullied and now she had to act according to He Yuan's temper, so she felt even angrier. She didn't care what others thought and just stood with a heavy expression. Looking at her, He Yuan irritably moved aside his gaze. When he raised his head, he saw a crimson-clad figure come down across the white jade steps. The white and red, under the light of the fireworks, had an unspeakable sense of beauty. He tried to regain focus. When the person came near, he found it was He Heng's Wang Fei. When he saw it was his brother's woman, he didn't look any more. He faintly moved his gaze away and turned to walk without another word. There evidently wasn't any desire to bid farewell to his brothers. He Ming wanted to say farewell, but seeing that De Ge and Erge seemed as though they didn't see it, he hesitated and then lowered his head. Your hands are a bit cold. He Hung walked to the stairs, and as Chu Qingju stepped on the last step, he grabbed her hand. He took down the cape he was wearing and wrapped it tightly around Chu Qingju before he said to He Qi and He Ming, De Ge, Sid, I'm going to leave first. Feel free, Erd. He Qi glanced at the tightly bundled Dime, smiled and waved his hand. It's late, Erd and Dime should return early. No wonder Lao protected her like she was his eyes, and was wearing a not well-made pouch. He looked with a teasing look at He Hung. This Dime did have some beauty. He Ming was so honest that he didn't even dare look anywhere. He respectfully bowed with his hands in front. Erge, take care. He made as to accompany them. The fox fur that swept across the nose was a bit ticklish, so Chu Qingju raised a hand to push it aside. She happened to saw He Ming's proper farewell. There's no need, Sid. He Hung held Chu Qingju's and gently refused. We're brothers, there's no need to be so polite. Finishing, he turned to leave. He Ming stared in confusion at the figure of Erge striding away. The step he had taken hadn't even been completed. After you get married, you'll understand. He Qi patted his shoulder and happened to see Wei Xian Qi come out. He finished, Ge's also leaving, you should return early too. Finishing, he boldly also left. He Ming watched with even more confusion as He Qi walked aside. He saw De Sao come over and bowed in greeting. In such a quick length of time, all his brothers left. He felt it was even harder to understand them. It was a rare night that there wasn't a curfew in the palace. He Ming waited for everybody to finishing leaving before he started walking towards Nguipan's palace. Nguipan's palace wasn't big, the furnishings weren't exquisite, but because she had an imperial son, the Department of Household Affairs didn't dare skimp. Compared to the consorts that were not favored, her days were already very good. She never lacked the necessities. Mother and son were always afraid of other people's suspicions, so they didn't spend much time together normally. Meeting today, they could speak more. When Nguipan heard her son mention what had happened after the night banquet, she couldn't help but laugh. It's not our business what they do. As to Ning Wang's words, seeing her son's ignorance, the smile on her face brightened. Just a joke, you don't have to think about it. Duan Wang's wife had an exquisite appearance. As the imperial family, they didn't lack in beautiful women, but Duan Wang's wife had an extra hint of flavor in there. As a person that had stayed for so long in the palace, she naturally understood how attractive this kind of women was to men. As a Wang Fei, to have this kind of looks, she didn't know if it was a boon or a curse. Thinking back to Duan Wang Fei as she subserviently drank tea and ate dessert next to Jing Gaifei, Nguipan shook her head. Jing Gaifei wasn't a simple person. Reminiscing back to how she was the same age when she had entered the palace, she wanted for Duan Wang Fei to have a comfortable life. She said in a meaningful tone, Ming in the future, treat your wife well. It's hard to be a woman. He Ming obediently answered, but still didn't understand how the topic had moved to his future wife. Maybe, it was that he was too dumb, little Ming Wang Ye thought helplessly. After the new year, it was the first day of the first month of the new year. Chu Qingju and He Hung sat in the great hall of the Wangfu. The major and minor stewards came up one by one to perform greetings for the new year, and the lower-ranked servants kowtowed outside the hall. Listening to the variety of celebratory words of the servants, Chu Qingju motioned for Mujin and Chu Kui to reward these people. She looked at the joy and cheer on these people's faces. Thinking back to the previous life and her mood when she had received a bonus at her agent company, it was probably the same as these people here. Nikkei kowtows to Wang Ye and Wang Fei and hope Wang Ye and Wang Fei have a good and smooth new year. Qian Chong Xin and Ming He were close to He Hung. The wishes they said were shallow and clear, but the loyalty on their faces were more visible than any other. Chu Qingju looked at the two of them and then at He Hung. She commented, Wang Ye, they don't have it easy running her, and they're with you every day. You have to give them a good reward. Hearing this, He Hung smiled. He pointed out, in our home, it's Wang Fei, you, who makes the decisions. So it's you who decides how to reward them. The stewards present heard Wang Yi's words and stopped breathing. In the last few days, Wang Fei had been controlling Hao Wang, but some people were still trying to worm their way through. Today, Wang Ye was saying it very blankly. Some of the people who understood felt sweat forming on their foreheads. Since that is so, then Qi will take matters into her own hands. When there were many people around, Chu Qingju followed protocol and called herself Qi in spite of the fact she disliked this ilism very much. Mu Jing, give 2 pouches to the 2 gong gong. The 2 received the pouches, not squeezing or looking at them. They instantly kowtowed and gave thanks, their attitudes extremely deferential. Those 2 were definitely worthy of serving by He Heng's side. They had no visible flaws. She looked at the audience and announced in a loud voice, "It's the first, there's no need to be so reserved. You can all retreat." The servants kowtowed again before bowing as they left. Coming out of the great hall, some started admiringly at the 2 senior gong gong for catching the eye for the master and mistress. They carefully flattered them and some tried to find out what the pouches contained but were brushed off by the 2 men. After the people in the surroundings left, the 2 then opened the pouches. It wasn't some rare item in the pouch but a banknote for 50 taels of silver. The 2 simultaneously gave a sigh of relief. If Wang Fei really did bestow some rare item, then it would be troublesome. The 2 exchanged a look. Qian Chong Xin sighed, "Our Wang Fei isn't a simple one. Us 2 have to do our best in the future." For normal people, 50 taels of silver was a large fortune, but to them, it wasn't that hard to get. Wang Fei had given them this number and it showed that Wang Fei wasn't trying to entice them. It was telling them she thought them worthy but hoped that they wouldn't do something they shouldn't. 50 taels, it matched their status perfectly. Wasn't it just telling them to know their place? After the stewards had left, He Heng's women came in a short while. In these women, other than the 4 shiki that had status, there was a Tongfang called Bai Ji. He Hung originally had 3 Tongfang. But Yunqing had been married off to someone on an estate, Banxia had been sentenced by Chu Qingju to become a laundress, so the only one remaining that Chu Qingju hadn't saw before was Bai Ji. After these women greeted her, Chu Qingju didn't have any advice to say to them. She turned to ask He Hung, "Wang Ye, do you have anything to say?" He Hung didn't understand, but to the shiki, he really didn't have anything to say, so he shook his head. "Since Wang Ye has nothing to say, you can all leave." Chu Qingju raised her teacup. "Mu Jin, take out the red pockets that I prepared for them. Usher them out." The shiki stood in shock. They hadn't expected to be so quickly thrown out. Where was the required lecturing that occurred in other fuss? Wasn't she supposed to say something along the lines of "Serve Wang Ye well, respect the Wang Fu's rules"? Each one of them held a red pocket and hadn't recovered when they came out of the great hall. Luo Yanqiu asked dazedly, "We're leaving like this? If we don't return, what are we doing here?" Han Qinghe pulled on the cape she wore and walked away without looking back. Bai Ji looked with some reluctance at the great hall before she slowly started her steps. Inside the hall, Chu Qingju stood and shook her body. "Wang Ye is reluctant to part with the beauties." He Hung put down the teacup in his hand. He followed in standing. In a helpless tone, he announced, "It's almost noon, let's go eat." Finishing, he pulled Chu Qingju's hand and said warmly, "Don't think too much." Hearing this, Chu Qingju smiled, but there wasn't any mirth in her eyes. Chapter 34 Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I thought the holidays would be more relaxed, not busier than normal. Chu Qingju held a thick stack of gift lists from each fu. She rubbed at her forehead and put the lists to one side. "After we finish with these, this year's festivities will pretty much be over. Celebrating the new year is to indulge in the celebration, so naturally there will be more gifts." Mu Jin kneaded at her shoulders as she persuaded, "It has been tiring these past days going to the other Wang Fu. After you go to Xiangqing Hofu tomorrow, it would be relaxing. Chu Qingju was very satisfied with Mu Jing's skill. At this time, her eyes were at half-mast. It's not that simple. Tomorrow, at Xiangqing Hofu, it wouldn't just be me. Womenfolk from the other Fu will also be there. It will still be busy. At year's end, the tradition of visiting each other still hasn't changed much in this place. Chu Qingju was sick of hearing plays, nauseous when she saw meat. Thankfully, due to her high status, she didn't have to run around. Wang Fei, Yuzan walked in. She saw Chu Qingju's relaxed state and informed, Wang Fei, Bao Rong Hofu sent you an invitation. Bao Rong Hofu. Chu Qingju remembered that this Marchioness of Bao Rong was at odds with Liang Shi and was one of He Yuan's, so she waved her hands, put it down. Send somebody with a reply that I don't have the time. The type of house that was Bao Rong Hofu, they were shameless enough to send her an invitation. Did they think that because she didn't like Liang Shi, she would give them the honor? Such a joke. Yuzan put away the invitation. She gossiped, Newbie heard, this year, they had picked many beautiful women to enter the place from all the places. It's unknown if some will enter our Fu. Chu Qingju moved her neck to relieve the soreness there before replying faintly, it hasn't happened yet. There's no need to worry. But get Huang Yang to look inside the Fu. If somebody starts something, tell me straight away. Yuzan heard that Wang Fei's tone with calm and assumed that Wang Fei had a plan, so she stopped. She reported, these last days, there wasn't anything, but a few days ago, Han Shiki and Feng Shiki argued for a bit in the garden. Chu Qingju smiled, don't stop them. Let's wait a few days. Han Qinghe was a good hand at moving with the current. When Feng Ziijin was favored, she followed Feng Ziijin like she was her alpha. Now that she, as Wang Fei, had the power, she naturally had to show her side. There wasn't anything interesting in this type of person. Chu Qingju was too lazy to see her act and sighed, get somebody to go without to inventory the gifts from outside and put them into stores with Jianchong Xin and the others. Hearing this, Yuzan bowed and retreated. Mujin said hesitantly, Wang Fei, Han Shiki's personality shifts constantly. Newbie is worried that she will have ideas in the future. It's still nothing no matter how many ideas she has. Chu Qingju laughed lightly, she is the oldest woman at Wang Yi's side. Wang Yi doesn't like her anymore. She naturally has to find somebody to rely on. I don't need to always keep an eye on such a person. Mujin understood what Wang Fei had meant. No matter how this flea was strong, it was still a flea, it can't become a tiger. Spending too much focus on a flea, that was throwing away a watermelon to get a sesame seed. In the afternoon, He Hung returned from a banquet. After he drank half a cup of tea, he finally controlled his drunkenness. He ordered the servants to prepare a bath, and when he saw a few Yawan follow in, he waved his hand, retreat, Ben Wang doesn't need your service. The people inside the room all retreated. He took off his clothes and relaxed in the bathtub for a while before he started to wash. After he put on his inner robe, he then called for servants. He ordered, in the future, Ben Wang doesn't need any servants for a bath. Just now at the banquet, he had heard a joke. A certain nobleman had been touching a servant girl during his bath. Who knew that he had been caught by his powerful wife? During the resulting argument, his manhood had been wounded. The rumor was that it was crippled now. This incident had caused the male guests that heard it to feel their lower half hurt. And He Hung didn't have any more interest in letting servant girls serve him during his bath. At least, he didn't have any interest in the short term. Reminiscing back to the endless pleasure of that Mandarin duck's bath with Chu Qingju, He Hung felt that his throat was itchy. After he was attired, He Hung adjusted the deep blue pouch at his waist, to Wang Fei's place. Ming He, who had been serving at the side, was used to it by now. He took up Wang Yi's cape and followed. He mentioned for the young Taijian at the back to follow as well. Qianchong Xin was sorting the gifts for stores right now, so he had to focus for the time being. It wasn't early in the day when He Hung returned. After a bath, it was already time for the evening meal. Chu Qingju saw him come and the two could use the meal together. Even though vegetables occupied the majority of the dishes on the table, the two had a good appetite. After the noon, it was still early. He Hung had an itch for a game of Wiki 1 and just had to have a match with Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju, who only knew the rules, had to helplessly sacrifice herself. If heaven would give He Hung a chance, he would never let Chu Qingju play Wiki with him. Looking at the terrible state of the board, and the interested look in Chu Qingju's eyes, he helplessly put down a stone. "Ah, Wang Yat, how can you play here?" Chu Qingju saw her stones were blocked and couldn't resist picking up the stone that had been put down before. "Then I won't play here, change a place, change. For gentlemen, once the stone is down, it cannot be moved. How many times have you changed your stones tonight?" He Hung couldn't help but sigh. This was the worst game he had played his entire life. Even when he had just started learning, it hadn't been as torturous as right now. "I'm a woman, I have the right to regret it. It's you men that are gentlemen, it doesn't count with me." Chu Qingju shoved the white stone into He Hang's hand. She picked up her black stone and put it down somewhere else. "Here." He Hung pretended not to see the gap at that place and randomly put his stone down. Watching as Chu Qingju joyfully ate his stone, he asked, "Didn't you just say that women had great intelligence? What does women's intelligence have to do with me regretting my move?" Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow, a face full of surprise. "Wang Yat, you must have misunderstood." Finishing, she put down another stone. He Hung wanted to say that it was his move, but seeing the other's cheerful state, he couldn't open his mouth. The Wiki skill that he had so much pride in front of his Wang Fei, it was a total loss. When a person just learned something, it was the time that they had the greatest interest. Chu Qingju was at the point where she had the greatest interest. After playing for close to 2 hours, He Hung looked at the disaster of a match and avoided the interested face of Chu Qingju. He stood and walked in front of Chu Qingju, bending at the waist to lift the person. "It's late now, Qingju, you should retire with me." Chu Qingju wrapped an arm around his neck. "Then you have to play with me tomorrow." He Hung felt his throat choke, but the smile on his face was as warm as always. "We'll talk about it tomorrow." Finishing, he carried the person as he walked towards the inner room. Ming He, Mu Jin and the others saw the situation and quickly retreated. But as they left, they both thought, Wang Fei's Wiki skills, it stank terribly. It was a miracle that Wang Ye could tolerate it for this long. Maybe it was that he was too worked up from playing Wiki, but after he finished with Chu Qingju, He Hung felt very relaxed. Under the light of the night luminous pearls, he saw the eyes with which she looked at him. With a look, he couldn't help but reach out with his hand to that soft skin. The feeling under his hand was too comfortable, so comfortable that he didn't dare move his hand away. Ticklish. When He Hang's hand moved to her waist, Chu Qingju couldn't resist lightly kneeing the other. Who knew that she pressed on the wrong spot, and that hand moved from the waist downwards. The mischievous hand caused Chu Qingju to squirm but was suppressed by He Hung. He rubbed against her chest and asked, "Is it ticklish here?" The hand had reached a certain warm place. N. Chu Qingju felt her body soften. On the bed, He Hung could be considered a very good man. At least, when the other was being satisfied, Chu Qingju was also satisfied. She reached across the other's back, her moist lips brushing past his slightly cold ear. She blew a warm breath, also ticklish. This move lit a great fire. He Hung bit down gently on her collarbone. "I'll help you stop it." It was another physical exercise full of hotness. After both of them were comfortable, Chu Qingju leaned against He Hung and rubbed against the other's body for warmth as she fell asleep. He Hung put his hand at Chu Qingju's waist. Looking at her sleeping visage, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The second morning, Chu Qingju sat up on the bed and looked at the man wiping his face with a cotton cloth. She said with some surprise, Wang Ye is coming with me to Hofu. A husband accompanying the recently married daughter to perform New Year greetings to the elders, isn't it normal? He hung threw the towel back into the basin and mentioned for the kneeling servant girl holding the basin to leave. He walked in front of Chu Qingju and pinched her face. The smooth feeling he received made his mood even better. Wake up quickly and eat. Later, you still have to attire yourself. Finishing, he didn't look at Chu Qingju's reaction and walked out the inner room. Chu Qingju stilled and was speechless. A man satisfied in a certain area, he did become much gentler. After the morning meal, when Chu Qingju was dressing, he sat with interest at the side. Seeing the servant girl's present box after box of jewelry, he opened, put on that biao I gave you. Hearing this, the hand Chu Qingju was using to pick a biao made a turn and held up that Qingluan biao to Yuzan who was doing her hair. Looking at this peerless biao inserted in her hair, Chu Qingju's lips curled, this biao is so beautiful I don't dare wear it. No matter how beautiful, it needs somebody to wear it. He came behind her, touching the biao. He took the forehead jewel and personally put it on Chu Qingju. He bent down to look at her image in the mirror, as long as you like them, these coarse items don't cost anything. Chu Qingju rubbed the forehead jewel. She raised her head to look at He Hung. There was a warm smile on the other's face as though he was an infatuated man looking at his beloved woman. She smiled and turned her head down. She drew with an eyebrow pencil to make her brows even more beautiful. After she finished drawing the flower between her brows, she raised her head again and asked with a bashful smile, is this good? He felt as though he was struck by this smile. The smile on his own face was so gentle it was like water, very good. Pulling up the person by the mirror, he exclaimed, that the teeth are as white as a rhinoceros horn, the eyebrows are as beautiful as a butterfly, the blushing face is akin to a blooming lotus, the pale skin is like the frost is just so. But there aren't enough poems in this world to describe the feelings I have at this time. In Wang Yi's eyes, I am that good. Chu Qingju tilted her head, I don't believe it. Has Qingju ever heard that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? He smiled as he touched the hair next to her face, it's fine, you'll naturally understand in the future. It's late, we should go now. Yuzan and the younger Yawan who had been doing the attiring were blushing at one side, amazed at the depth of feeling between Wang Ye and Wang Fei. It was the people by the door, Qian Chong Xin, Ming He and Mujin who had much steadier faces. They quietly had their heads low as though they couldn't hear what Wang Ye and Wang Fei said. And they were just wooden puppets that couldn't hear or speak. Chapter 35 The Tian Family. The Marquis of Xiangqing, Tian Jinke, wasn't yet 50 this year. His personal conduct was sincere but he wasn't inflexible. He had a good reputation in Jing City. Chang de Gongfu was probably the only entity he didn't like in the entire city of Jing. By now, there wasn't anyone in Jing City that didn't know Duan Wang Fei was close to her relatives in Xiangqing Hofu, and treated Xiangqing Hofu like her own maternal family. Due to the fact that what the Duke of Changde had done really wasn't something to be proud of, there were some that praised Tian Jinke for being so loving. Not everybody would care for a niece that didn't even have a mother. Karma was real. See how Duan Wangfu had distanced itself from Changde Gongfu, this was karma. Today was the Tian family banquet. After the morning just had passed, the guests started to arrive. Tian Jinke took his two sons, Tian Kun and Tian Jun, to welcome the male guests. Just as he was deep in conversation with the guests, he saw the stewards run over quickly to say Duan Wang Ye had come. Duan Wang. Tian Kun looked in shock at the steward. He realized the surrounding guests were gazing in this direction and lowered his voice to ask, Father, why would Duan Wang come? Tian Jinke waved a hand, loudly, come with me to the middle door to welcome Wang Ye. Lao stay here and accompany the guests. Finishing, he walked with great strides towards the outside. Tian Jun looked at the backs of his father and brother. When he turned, he saw all the guests had curiosity on their faces, so he started to divert their attention. He was surprised inside. His family didn't have many interactions with Duan Wang. Was it really that Duan Wang was willing to lower himself for Mimi? Tian Gongzi, is there a valued guest coming? A guest of the same age as him put his hands up in a greeting. Who is it? Tian Jun smiled as he returned the greeting. Everybody is a valued guest. When the person arrives, everybody will have to drink a few more cups. Of course, of course. This person smiled. Even though he hadn't found out anything, but at least what Tian Jun said didn't embarrass him, so he wasn't angry. The others saw that it wasn't likely and they settled down. No matter what, they would see them later. This person might be of high status, but he wouldn't be the emperor. Tian Kun stood behind his father and looked at the large 8-person sedan imprinted with the characters of Duan Wang Fu stop at the gate. He raised his feet to walk outside the door and bowed. This lowly official welcomes Wang Yat, Wang Fei. Qian Chong Xin came up to bow to Tian Kun with both hands raised. He bowed to open the curtain and revealed to Tian Kun He Hung and Chu Qingju sitting together. There was a hint of intimacy between the two. He quickly lowered his head, afraid to look. Biao Xiang doesn't have to be so courteous. He Hung held Chu Qingju's hand as they walked out of the sedan. He smiled, we are one family, there's no need to be so polite. Finishing, he held out a hand to let Tian Kun straighten before he walked into the gate with Chu Qingju. Zhu. Chu Qingju gave a very deep bow. She looked at the middle-aged man in front of her. His appearance was proper and he had a strong posture. It was easy to feel at ease with this man. As her uncle, Tian Jinkai hadn't spent much time with Chu Qingju. He made a motion as to support Chu Qingju and quickly scanned her. He saw that his niece seemed to be living well before he bowed with 2 hands up. Wang Yat, Wang Fei. Marquis doesn't have to be so courteous. You are Wang Fei's Juju, so you are Ben Wang's Juju. He Hung returned a greeting, there's no need to be so polite. Tian Jinkai smiled as he straightened. In a warm voice he responded, if that it's so, then this lowly official can only overlook protocol. Wang Yat, please come with this official. The smile on his face became much friendlier, but his conduct still held to protocol. But even like this, it still allowed people to feel that his attitude was much more intimate. Chu Qingju looked at this uncle of hers. No wonder he was like a fish in water in Jing City. Such conduct, everybody would praise it. It could be seen how important emotional intelligence was. The male and female guests had separate banquets. After He Hung followed Tian Jinkai and left, Chu Qingju smiled at Tian Kun, who kept 5 paces away from her and turned to get on the already prepared sedan. Watching as the sedan was carried away by heavy labor mamas, Tian Kun allowed a smile to appear. It seemed as though his sister had a somewhat good life. His family could rest some of their worries. Putting his hands behind at his back, he slowly headed inside. Instantly, the smile on his face grew fainter. The members of the imperial family, their desires and interests changed quickly. Who knew if Duan Wang would always treat his sister this way? He himself was a man and naturally understood those desires of men. What about a man like Duan Wang, who was used to seeing beautiful women? When the sedan came into men, it stopped. Chu Qingju came down the sedan and saw Luo Shi with a young girl standing not far away. She walked a few steps in front of Luo Shi and bowed in greetings, "Good day, Jamu." Luo Shi and the girl behind quickly returned a greeting before she reached out with a hand to meet hers to observe, "You look thinner. Come with me inside now, this cold period in spring is too strong." All the elders of the world were the same. When they saw younger generations after a long time, they always felt that they had become thinner. Chu Qingju intimately held Luo Shi's hand. "I'm not thin, the entire Wang Fu is under my command. The servants don't dare treat me badly." Luo Shi cared for her like she was half a daughter. Seeing that she was willing to be close to her, she naturally felt happy. Luo Shi patted her hand as she said lovingly, "You have to manage such a large Wang Fu, you must be tired, it doesn't matter how good you eat." Finishing, she started to ask whether the servants were easy to manage or if she had troubles with her residence and food. Her actions were very similar to how Jing Gaifei questioned He Hung. Chu Qingju answered the questions one by one. She saw the girl behind Luo Shi kept quiet all this time and inquired, "Jamu, such a pretty Gunyang, which family? She looks so adorable." Luo Shi stopped walking and looked at the Gunyang that Chu Qingju mentioned. The girl's face was already crimson. Luo Shi answered, "She's the same year as you, but a month younger. It's appropriate for you to call her Mimi. This is the eldest niece of my maternal family, Wen Yao. In the future, you will spend a lot of time together, so I wanted you two to meet." Wen Yao, Luo Wen Yao? Chu Qingju instantly understood. This was the granddaughter of the Luo family that had been decreed to marry He Ming. She saw that Luo Wen Yao's face was as red as it could get and didn't ask for confirmation, only commenting, "I like this meme." Luo Shi heard her inappropriate words and sighed, "Just a few days, you are even more mischievous." Finishing, she pulled Luo Wen Yao over to let them stand right and left of her, "But, you like this Mimi, then I don't have to worry any longer." Chu Qingju understood Luo Shi's meaning. Such a good girl forced to marry an disfavored imperial son. Not every family was willing. The waters of the imperial family were muddy, her husband wasn't favored, none of hers huli were simple. If there wasn't somebody there, she would definitely be at a disadvantage. Thinking about it, she let a smile appear on her face, and, "Don't worry. I will definitely care for Wen Yao Mimi like she was my own." There were 4 Erxifu in the imperial family. But the 3 had to be at odds with each other. If she was close to Luo Wen Yao, it wasn't a bad thing. But she hadn't thought that the Luo family would actually take this step. It could be seen that they really loved this girl. Luo Wen Yao quietly listened to her aunt and Duan Wangfei talk. In the past, she had heard much about how before Duan Wangfei had married, she had been harshly treated by her stepmother. Today, as she saw the real person, she felt this was a blinding woman. Each move and laugh full of grace and stirring in her a strange feeling of closeness. People were very easily attracted by people dissimilar to them. Luo Wen Yao's personality was quiet and gentle, her future husband had no conflict with Duan Wang. Seeing the friendliness of Chu Qingju, it was naturally easy to feel close to her. So when they walked into the room, the two of them had started conversing. The elder Luo Taitai, who had been sitting in the room, already expressed a relieved smile as she saw the scene. It looked like this Duan Wangfei took after the Tian family's personality. The female guests present were close-knit to the Luo and Tian families, so they weren't too formal as they interacted with Chu Qingju. It was just when they heard that Duan Wang had accompanied Chu Qingju that they felt deeply moved. Some detected that Duan Wangfei came in with a gunyang of the family Luo and understood what was happening. Nobody announced it but only talked about some interesting local events to while away the time. "I heard that an able person came to the 5 Estates Monastery. He's very skilled at explaining the divination sticks. After the flowers bloom, I will go beg with my family." "Isn't the 5 Estates Monastery in the Jing suburbs? When are you going? Let's go together to beg for a stick." Chu Qingju heard this piece of conversation and put the teacup in her hand down. The dominant religion in Dalong dynasty was Buddhism. The court didn't support any, but the citizens each had their own beliefs. Luo Shi saw that Chu Qingju seemed to be interested in the 5 Estates Monastery and elaborated, that 5 Estates Monastery is the biggest monastery in Jing, it's on the Baiyun mountain on the suburbs. The able person they are talking about is most likely spiritual master Xian Ling. If you are interested, you can go take a visit. Chu Qingju smiled, "There's no need. A person's fate is already set down by the heavens. To go divine it, it would decrease the good fortune." She wasn't a resolute atheist, but she did believe that good fortune and luck will decrease with divination, so she wasn't interested in begging for a divination stick. Nobody thought Chu Qingju would say something like this. Luo Shi stared in astonishment before nodding, this is true. Luo Wenyao, listening in, felt her heart jump. She looked with respect at Chu Qingju. With such an open mind, how many women in this world could achieve such a thing? At this time, she felt that the worries she had about her marriage were just she making it difficult on herself. Nothing would be different thinking about things that had already been set in stone. It would be better for her to think how she would live the rest of her life, that was her good fortune. Thinking about this, the stare that Luo Wenyao gave Chu Qingju had a hint of gratefulness, a smile appearing on her face. After the banquet, the guests listened for a long while before bidding farewell. Chu Qingju, when most of the guests had left, finally stood and held Luo Shi's hand as she announced, "Jimu, I need to return now." Luo Shi was a bit reluctant but had to agree, "In the Fu, take care of your body. There's a lot of people you should take notice of." This was reminding her of the Ce Shi, but due to Luo Shi's identity, she couldn't say it. Chu Qingju nodded before she bent to enter the sedan. After she looked again at Luo Shi, she let the servant drop the curtain. Watching as the sedan disappear outside Min, Luo Wenyao exclaimed in a quiet voice, "Duan Wangfei is really an amazing person." Luo Shi looked at her niece and thought about the days that her niece had suffered through in Changde-gongfu. She sighed. Hopefully Duan Wang would continue to treat her well. You have to remember, for a woman to live well, the priority is to treat herself well. If she could discomfort herself, others will also do so. Luo Shi opened in a meaningful voice, "Cheng Wang might not have the emperor's favor, but I have seen him before. He has a lenient personality, you don't have to be too worried." Gumu. Luo Wenyao's face instantly reddened, in the midst of her bashfulness there were a few hints of expectancy. At the main gate of Xiangqing Hofu, He Hung watched as Chu Qingju walked out of the sedan. A hint of a smile appeared on his face, and Tian Kun, who had been accompanying him at one side, couldn't help but look. He watched as Duan Wang walked towards Biao Mei. Maybe it was that the two had such outstanding appearances, or maybe their smiles were too intoxicating. This scene was very beautiful, but it was so beautiful it didn't seem real. Tian Kun blinked his eyes. Maybe he was thinking too much. Chapter 36 Strife. On the 8th day of the first month, the royal court opened once again. The carriages and sedans that moved through the city lessened and peddlers gradually filled the streets again. But just as the court opened, a grand case was pushed out. There was an official who accused Rui Wang of putting out high-interest loans in Jiangnan, of participating with the salt governance and casinos. Once this came out, it instantly caused huge ripples. On the third day, as this incident grew larger and larger, this official suddenly accused Rui Wang of having a guilty conscience and threatening his family. After he finished, under the gaze of the entire court, he rammed himself into the gold-coiled dragon pillar with his head for an instant death. This was akin to throwing water into boiling oil. The explosion rocked the entire Jing city. The emperor was so angry he fainted in the royal hall. For a time, each person in Jing defended themselves, afraid they would be involved. In Duan Wangfu, Chu Qingju flipped through the ever-increasing states of calling cards. She furrowed her eyebrows and ordered, "In the future, if somebody asks for a meeting, just say I am sick, and Wang Ye is busy with his duties, not in the Fu and cannot receive guests." At this time, He Qi was locked in conflict with He Yuan. Duan Wangfu didn't need to involve itself. Enough smart officials in Jing should have already found that the dead official was connected with Ning Wang. Ning Wang was also fighting with Rui Wang at this time. Everybody was content to look at the spectacle. Why involve themselves? Mu Jin nodded to show she remembered. Seeing Wang Fei's face was dark, she informed, "This morning, people from Changde-gongfu came. They said that Lao Tai missed you." Chu Qingju gave a disdainful smile. She marveled, "When I was at Changde-gongfu, I didn't see that Lao Tai missed me. To think they would think of me now." She just didn't like the conduct of Changde-gongfu, Right now, they don't have anyone at court. They just want to use Lao Tai as an excuse to find information. Tell the messenger that I received a cold a long time ago. Now when I get cold, I will get sick. Since the reputation of Chang de Gongfu was already terrible, she didn't mind adding more negativity. Either way, the news that Liang Xi abused the daughter left behind by the first wife was already out there. This is good, it will stop those shameless people from trying to associate themselves. Yin Lu added some smokeless charcoal to the copper lion basin in the corner. She said with righteous fury, newbie is just afraid if you let them a bit, they will try to paste themselves onto in the future. Chu Qingju heard this metaphor and couldn't help but smile. You're thinking too much. Chang de Gongfu might be shameless but they wouldn't dare rush to fawn. With the Duke of Changde's personality, how could he bear to shame Liang Xi? As to Liang Xi, she didn't want to see her even more. The only person that might sincerely want to have good relations with Duan Wangfu was Chu Lao Tai. But it was a pity she was old and she was no longer the ruler of Chang de Gongfu. Mu Jin looked at Yin Lu, forbidding her from saying what she shouldn't say. Yin Lu was more and more brash recently. Even if Wang Fei was kind, she shouldn't use Wang Fei's favor and forget her own boundaries. Under Mu Jin's stare, Yin Lu knew she broke protocol and quickly shut up, not daring to talk nonsense. Watching the movements between the two, Chu Qingju smiled but didn't speak. Yin Liu's personality was a bit too brash. Letting Mu Jin teach her a bit, it was to prevent her from being harmed by this personality. In Rui Wangfu, He Yuan smashed a teacup with a dark face. He Qi made such a good play this time. Thinking about that official that performed suicide on the pillar in the royal hall, He Yuan felt his anger reach a peak. At what time did he need to threaten a minor official? But now that the incident has reached the point of no return, Fu Huang had to calm the others and actually rescinded his qualification to attend court. Even more, he couldn't leave his Wangfu. He never was at peace with Lao Dai, but due to Fu Huang's partialness for him, he had never lost much at the royal court. He hadn't expected that this time he would suffer such a large fall. Wang Yat, this incident is most likely complicated. As to what to do, the most important is to clean up what was going on in Jiangnan, a subordinate persuaded. Now that this has been uncovered and revealed by Ning Wang, the emperor will definitely send somebody to Jiangnan to investigate. As long as there is no proof, then it will still be fine if a few more people die. He actually understood inside that no matter if Wang Ye could pick himself out of this incident, his reputation would be damaged. People usually believed bad news, not good news. When it was time and there was proof that this incident had nothing to do with Wang Ye, in the eyes of others, it was the emperor that wanted to protect Wang Ye and purposefully absolved Wang Ye. In this case, Wang Ye had done these things in the first place. It's fine if a few more people die. He Yuan smiled coldly as he looked at his subordinates. He looked at another subordinate, Gao Duo. Who do you say that Fu Huang would send to investigate in Jiangnan? The retainer called Gao Duo didn't rush to speak because He Yuan called on him. He ruminated for a while before replying, Wang Yat, you are the most favored of the emperor's sons. This to you, it is the biggest factor in your favor. By now, Ning Wang's actions are getting bigger and bigger. This is increasing the emperor's wariness of him. If this one hasn't guessed wrong, the emperor will send Cheng Wang and an official that the emperor favors to Jiangnan. Lao Si. He Yuan raised an eyebrow. Lao Si is always cowardly and has no ideas, there's no need to worry there. The only problem is the accompanying official. At the royal court now, there are 4 officials that the emperor trusts the most. The first is the Marquis of Xiangqing, Tian Jinke, who is also the junior minister of justice. But this man is Duan Wang Fei's uncle, so the emperor won't send him. The second is the minister of defense, Luo Chongqing, but this man is Cheng Wang's future father-in-law, so the emperor would have even less in likelihood of sending him. The third is also the person already responsible as chief examiner for this year's examinations, the great scholar Liu Jinghong. Taking away these 3, the only one remaining is the minister of the right Wei Wang. And this person might not be the most able, but he is very perceptive and good at pandering to the emperor's desires. Gao Duo performed a bow and said in a meaningful tone, Wang Ye, all that this one has surmised, all of it rests on the premise of the emperor's partialness for you. He Yuan finished listening and sat in thought on the chair. The franticness on his face gradually calmed. Mr. Gao's meaning, Ben Wang understands. You can all leave. Hearing the change in what Wang Ye had called him, Gao Duo left with a calm expression along the other men. After them came out of Zheng Yuan, he smoothed the scraggly hairs on his chin and smiled as he bore the jealous stares of the other subordinates as he walked out of the Wang Fu. In the front hall of Tian Qi Palace, He Hung and his 3 brothers stood at the bottom. Beside them there were some officials. Maybe it was that the expression on Qingde Emperor's face as he sat on the dragon chair was too ugly, but their faces were one heavier than the other. There were more than 100 complaints from the court to investigate Rui Wang. Even if Qingde Emperor had the desire, he couldn't suppress it. His already old visage became even more ancient. Looking at the sons and officials under him, he said in helplessness, the incident of Rui Wang, Zhen still has suspicions. We shall wait for it all to be investigated before making a decision. Even though everybody knew this was true, but at this time, they couldn't do anything other than shout Emperor is wise and start arguing over who to send to Jiangnan. Stop, Zhen has an idea about what you are all talking about. Zhen will send down a decree personally tomorrow at court. You can all leave. Qingde Emperor may have understood in his heart that these accusations were true, but he couldn't bear to punish his favorite son, so he distraughtly threw everybody out. He Qi face didn't look well as he walked out of the front hall. He didn't look at He Hung and He Ming before he swept away. It could be seen just how angry he was. He Ming blinked at De Ji, who had rushed away, and turned to look at Erge standing by his side as though he was waiting for him. It's late, us brothers should return too. He Hang's smile was casual, I did walk with Erge. Erge first. Hearing this, He Ming politely let He Hung to go ahead. Us brothers don't have to follow these rules. He Hung patted his shoulder and walked first. But it was unknown whether on purpose or not, but he almost always was walking abreast with He Ming. When the two reached the gate to the palace, they met He Yuan as he came out of a carriage. He Yuan was wearing a jewel blue satin robe. He looked more serious than before, even his face was a few shades whiter. The 3 performed greetings. He Yuan looked at the 2 and asked, is Erge and Sid preparing to leave the palace? He Hung was clear inside that He Yuan, at this moment, should be in his fu and not be appearing at the palace gates, but said with a normal face, yes, of course. Then Didi will say farewell first. He Yuan revealed a hint of mirth on his face. Erge and Sid, take care. Sanji, too. Because He Yuan didn't usually pay him attention and suddenly being mentioned, He Ming's face showed a hint of surprise. He instantly smiled and returned a greeting. Didi won't disturb Sanji anymore. He Yuan nodded and started in the direction of Tian Qi Palace with large strides, accompanied by a Tajian. The jewel blue back of the figure seemed a bit fretful. Seeing this scene, when He Hung looked at He Ming, the smile on his face grew fainter. When the 2 separated to get on their carriages, He Hung patted his shoulder, Sid, take care of yourself. He Ming smiled and bowed with 2 hands raised in a fist, Erge, take care. Looking at the horse-drawn carriage that was imprinted with the characters of Duan Wang Fu travel out the palace gates, He Ming entered his own carriage. After the curtain was let down, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. His eyes were filled with helplessness and pain. Once he came out of the carriage, and as He Hung stepped into the gate, he saw a paper luan flying in the sky as he raised his head. His eyes narrowed and he frowned as he looked at Ming He behind him. Find out who is doing it. In the future, no one in the Fu is allowed to fly such a thing. In the previous dynasty there had been people who used flying luan to pass messages to the outside. Right now, it was a tense time in Jing. He didn't want spies in his Duan Wang Fu. Yes, Ming He beckoned to the Tajian behind him. They quickly retreated and competed to use the quickest speed to find the person flying the kite. In Zhengyuan, Chu Qingju smiled at the flying beautiful Luan. She turned and remarked to Mu Jin, "Look, isn't there people who use such tactics?" Mu Jin smiled warmly, "Wang Fei is all-knowing. But who was it that was so stupid that they would do such an idiotic thing at this time?" Chapter 37 Suspicious. Chu Qingju saw the paper kite disappear after a while and said with some pity, "Oh, the weather hasn't turned warm yet, but some already have the leisure time to fly kites. It must be such a refined person." "What refined person?" He Hung walked in with large steps and happened to hear this sentence. He promised with a thin smile, "If Qingchu likes it, when the weather turns warm, I'll take you to the estate to play. You can fly whatever you want. It's too tiring to run." Chu Qingju disliked it. "If Wang Ye really cares for me, how about finding a few more chefs for this fu and let me taste all the foods in the world? That's good too. After a bit, I'll take you to the estate to taste authentic peasant food." He Hung pulled her inside and took down his cape to hand to a Yawan. "Those foods might not be as refined as in the fu, but it has a special flavor in itself. The dried meat that the estate sent over a few days ago was good." Chu Qingju poured him a cup of tea. After He Hung received it, she then sat down on the chair next to him. "I'll let them send some more over. Even if the flavor of these smoked foods is good, but it isn't good for the body to consume too much. You still have to abstain." He Hung took a drink of tea. When he heard what Chu Qingju said, he set down the teacup. "Don't act according to your likes only." Hearing this, Chu Qingju smiled and turned to trim a short pine tree. "Don't worry Wang Ye, I won't do stupid things." On the matter of food, the ancients had been experts a long time ago. But He Heng's words, did it have a double meaning? "All right, I know you like good food and will control yourself." He Hung felt that Chu Qingju was still smiling, but the mirth had lessened. He could only helplessly change the topic. "The person who was flying the paper luan in the fu, no matter who, you have to lock them up." Chu Qingju saw his face was slightly stern and slowly nodded. "Wang Yi's meaning is, let's investigate before anything else first." He Hung raised his cup again but didn't drink. He looked seriously at Chu Qingju. "There is always some people that don't belong to you or me in this Wang Fu." She hadn't thought that He Hung would tell such things to her. Chu Qingju looked at this man in a new light. This person definitely was decisive and ruthless, but he was gentle and elegant normally and lowered people's defenses. Wang Ye is suspicious that this person has other loyalties. "There's many ways to attract my attention, this way isn't very skilled." He Hung smiled thinly. "I saw that paper luan hadn't flown very high before the string broke and it fell outside the fu. This isn't something done to attract my attention." Chu Qingju slightly raised an eyebrow. She had assumed that someone was using this way to attract He Heng's attentions. She hadn't thought that someone would actually use this tactic to pass on a message at this special time. Thinking to there, she gave a shallow smile and pointed out, "Maybe it's a coincidence." "Coincidence? On purpose? It doesn't matter." He Hung calmly spoke, "We can't keep this person." The hand Chu Qingju used to trip the bonsai turned askew and cut down an additional branch. She picked up the pine branch with some pity. This pot was another one she had cut into a failure. In her last life, she had studied dancing and later became an agent in the dance circles. At the very least, she would be considered to be nimble in hand and feet, but how did she become a murderer of bonsai? Putting down the scissors in her hand, she turned to wash her hands in the copper basin a Yawan was holding. As she wiped her hands, she said, "These things, Wang Ye can make the decisions. The only thing I can help you do is manage this Hao Iwan." He Hung looked at her pale and thick fingers rubbing in the soft cotton and felt that this pair of hands was incomparably tempting. He stared in a daze before waking and praising, "You've done very well. After you came, this Ho Yang has become much more quiet." Putting the cotton cloth back onto the tray, she motioned for the Yawan to retreat. Chu Qingju turned to smile at He Hung. She asked, "Is Wang Ye disapproving of Ho Yang for being too quiet?" It's not quiet, it's calm. He Hung stood and pulled the person closer to him. I actually like the present state of how I win. Flinging a flirtatious look at the other, Chu Qingju turned and sat down on a chair by the side. It's good as long as Wang Ye likes it. I'm just afraid that Wang Ye thinks there aren't enough beautiful women and is angry at me for not being generous and virtuous enough. He Hung walked to her side and smooched a kiss on her cheek before replying, Ben Wang's Qingju is the most virtuous, able, deferent and intelligent. Reaching out with 2 fingers to push the other's face aside a bit, Chu Qingju raised her chin and chuckled, Wang Ye has to remember these words. Finishing, she saw the other's face full of smile and, as though it was a great favor, she gave a kiss to his chin. He Hung was so tempted by this move that his heart was trembling. There had been women that kissed him of their own initiative before, but he just felt that only this woman's actions were the most tempting. He wasn't to resist and bent to pull the other into his embrace. Wang Ye, we have captured the person flying the paper luan. Wang Ye, what should be done? He Hung had never before felt that Qianchong Xin was this unperceptive. He took a deep breath before standing and sitting down at the front. Come in. Chu Qingju raised a white and blue flowered teacup to hide half her face before she turned to smile cheerfully at He Hung. He Hung coincidentally saw the look and his heart was tickled again. He gave a deep look at her, sighed in frustration and helplessness before reluctantly moved his eyes away. Chu Qingju was very satisfied with He Hang's response. She adjusted into a more dignified posture and turned her head to watch as Qianchong Xin come in with a few others. At the very end was 2 strong mamas pinning a young woman wearing a pink dress. She looked somewhat familiar. When everybody had knelt down, Chu Qingju finally recognized this person. It was Bai Ji, one of He Hang's Tong Fang. She wasn't very clear why Bai Ji had stayed so long by He Hang's side. This person had never competed for attention and had been compliant for such a long time. Was it all an act? She had assumed that people would use she tactics to get favor. It seemed that she was wrong. It seemed, in this fight for the throne, it obviously couldn't be without the role of spies. Her eyesight wasn't far enough. This incident, to her, it was a very good lesson. If she was passing on news to the outside, what was she passing on? She was a minor Tong Fang, what could she have found? He Hung scraped the rim of the cup with the lid, making a slightly ear-piercing sound. But just this movement, it was enough to send Bai Ji into shivers of fright. Ben Wang remembers that you became a Tong Fang 2 years ago. He Hung blew on the surface of the tea, and said in a calm and emotionless tone, the paper luan you dropped outside, Ben Wang ordered them to pick it back. Why don't Ben Wang have a good look at that paper luan? Ban Ji's face slightly changed but she kowtowed as she pled, Wang Ye, forgive me. Newbie didn't know it wasn't allowed to fly a kite in the Wangfu. Wang Ye, please forgive me. Disregarding her appeals, He Hung saw Ming He come in with the paper luan. When he took it, he saw a simple picture of a beautiful woman. Beside the picture there were 2 lines of poetry. She wore shoes embroidered with delicate designs. What trailed behind was a garment as light as the mist. He Hung looked at the beauty drawn wearing a grand set of clothing, standing at a high place. He gave a soft snort, such a good drawing, such a good poem. Chu Qingju raised her eyebrows as she looked at Bai Ji. If she didn't guess wrong, the drawing was pointing at her? Wang Ye. Bai Ji's expression changed. Newbie hadn't been thinking clearly and forgot to avoid Wang Fei's name. Please forgive me, Wang Fei. Finishing, she started to kowtow repeatedly to Chu Qingju. A difficult expression appeared on Chu Qingju's face and she bit her lips as she gazed at He Hung. You don't have to beg, Wang Fei. He Hung slammed the paper luan in his hand to the table and ordered icily, someone come, Bai Ji has transgressed against Wang Fei. Drag her into the firewood room. Very quickly, someone came to drag Bai Ji away. He Hung stood and said to Chu Qingju, I have some matters to attend to, wait for me tonight to eat together. Chu Qingju nodded and tied his cape for him. She looked at the shambles of the paper luan that had been slammed into the table, this paper luan. Ming He, take the paper luan and burn it. After He Hung ordered Ming he turned to smiled Chu Qingju. He grasped her hand, don't worry. The back of her hand was being gently pinched. Chu Qingju glared once at He Hung. Seeing him turn to walk away, she finally opened, the weather is changing fast these days. If Wang yet is going out, you have to pay attention to your body. He Hung smiled again at her before leaving Zheng Yuan with his procession. Once he was outside, his face was dark as he commanded Qian Chong Xin, pay attention to see who will try to get near to the firewood room in the next few days. We would leave any of them around in the future. Qian Chong Xin nodded before informing quietly, Wang Yet, Wang Chongming has come. To the study, He Heng's face was still heavy. Thinking about the bothersome women in the Haoiwan, a disdainful smile appeared on his lips. When he met Wang Chongming, He Heng's face had recovered. Is there any news from that side? Wang Yet, Rui Wang has already entered the palace to meet the emperor. He wants Cheng Wang to go to Jiangnan. Wang Chongming's face held joy, it looks like our plan succeeded. Lao San always felt that he was above us other three brothers. He looks down the most at Lao Si. Naturally he would want to pick a soft target, He Hung smiled coldly. Find a way to spread the news to Ning Wang. With Ning Wang's personality, if he doesn't make a ruckus, Lao San's efforts would be such a waste. Pretending not to hear the secrets between the imperial sons, Wang Chongmin switched to say, this subordinate understands. What should be done at Rui Wang's side? Nobody has to do anything. With his personality, he'll do something himself, He Hung responded faintly, we just have to watch. Wang Chongming instantly understood and bowed, Wang Yet is perceptive. On the second day at court, the emperor sent down the decree as expected. He ordered Cheng Wang and the Minister of the Right, Wei Wenguang to investigate the incident in Jiangnan and bestowed a gold medal for as if it was Zhen here. He asked for the two to investigate finally, to prevent those people to mistakenly accuse Rui Wang. These words boldly broadcasted the emperor's attitudes. Many were clear. Even though Rui Wang still couldn't attend court, he was still the emperor's most favored and trusted imperial son. No wonder that person was fearless. A day later, He Ming and Wei Wenguang left with men and horses under the title of imperial envoy. Everyone in Jing sympathized this unfavored Cheng Wang. Everyone knew that the emperor just wanted to go through the motions. But if he did protect Rui Wang, this was going to put onto his reputation a stain of protecting villains that would be shown to the entire populace. It could be seen just how unequal the emperor favored his sons. He Qi sat in a tea shop and looked at the procession as it left the city. His face revealed a disdainful smile. After the procession had disappears, he put down his teacup, and said to the tea scholar that was pouring tea next to him, on the road, find a chance to attack. Try to not harm Cheng Wang. Chapter 38 The Woman in the Rumors. In the deep of the night where no one was there, a dark shadow flashed at the corner of the firewood room. Before this person could near the room itself, suddenly several lamps lit up in the surroundings. He looked in surprise and found many people surrounding him. Qian Yi here has waited so many days. Finally caught this rat. Qian Chong Xin held a lamp as he came out of the corner. He looked disdainfully at this servant in the guise of a manservant and raised his hand, bind him up, don't disturb anyone else. The servants rushed in. Before the person could speak, he was gagged, bound, and dragged away. Stupid trash, finishing, he spat on the ground. He kicked the door to the firewood room with one foot and looked down at Bai Ji who was tied and gagged in the corner. He gave a joyless smile and said, Bai Ji Gunning, your accomplice has already been captured. Why don't we have a chat and you tell me who let you into the fu? Bai Ji squirmed against the rope on her body but the ropes were too tight and she could not escape. She glared hatefully at Qian Chong Xin. Free her mouth, Qian Chong Xin took a whip from a person behind him. He slowly whipped it on his palm, his face still carrying a harmonious smile. Bai Ji Gunyang, have you thought what you are going to say? I don't know anything. Bai Ji hatefully turned her head away, not looking at Qian Chong Xin. I just wanted to fly a paper luan. Wang Ye has the wrong person. Qian Chang Xin was too lazy to argue with her but only said impatiently, there's not much difference between you saying or not. But it's such a pity for your old and young in the family, and the newly married sister of yours. How about we give you a crime of poisoning Wang Ye? Wonder what would your family have to suffer? Shameless. Bai Ji turned her head and stared straight at Qian Chong, saying, what do you want to do? You aren't the first person to praise Yi this way. Qian Chong Xin uncoiled the whip, the smile on his face even more visible. Suddenly the whip dealt a blow on Bai Ji's body. Usually the people who praise Yi like this, by now their teeth won't even be on their body. The pain caused her body to shrink. Bai Ji stated with a white face, newbie is innocent. Since you are willing to give up on your family to protect your master, then Yi won't care about your family either. Qian Chong Xin proclaimed cheerfully, tomorrow, I'll let your family go first. Hopefully when you go down to see them, you can still face them. Tears were streaming down Bai Ji's face. She covered her wound and chalked out, it's His Highness Ning Wang that wanted newbie to pay attention to the movement of the Fu. Except newbie's status was too low and couldn't pass out any news. A few days earlier, His Highness Ning Wang wanted newbie to investigate how Wang Ye treated Wang Fei in the Fu. Newbie assumed this wasn't such an important matter and so dared to pass on the news. She wasn't afraid of death but was afraid of it involving her family. That's nonsense. His Highness Ning Wang is a straightforward and honest person, you can't slander him. Qian Chong Xin disagreed, such vile slander, Wang Ye won't believe you. It's true. A while ago, newbie's Didi entered Ning Wang Fu for a job. Newbie had no other way and did wrong things. Gong Gong, please investigate carefully, newbie really didn't pass on any information. Bai Ji cried as she knelt in front of Qian Chong Xin. Fine, Yi, I don't want to listen to your nonsense. Qian Chong Xin retreated 2 steps, not allowing Bai Ji to hug his leg. He said in a cold voice, Bai Ji died due to an illness recently. Send somebody to give her family 30 taels of silver. Finishing, he motioned for the person to pour the poisonous wine into Bai Ji. Thank you Wang Ye, thank you Gong Gong. Bai Ji trembled as she held a hand and poured down the wine. No matter what, at least Wang Ye let her family go. Qian Chong Xin came out of the firewood room and threw the whip to one side. He took a handkerchief that a lower-ranked Tajian handed over to wipe his hand. Bury the person carefully. At least she served Wang Ye before. People, they can't try to find death themselves. Those that betray their masters, they don't have good endings. Finishing, he left without a second glance. Tong Fang Bai Ji's death didn't arouse much interest in the Fu. Everybody knew, Bai Ji died suddenly. Curiosity wasn't allowed in the case of a sudden death. When Chu Qingju heard the news, she was trimming a newly delivered bonsai. She finished listening to Huang Yang before she put down her scissors to order, since the person is gone, don't mention the past anymore. Get someone to send something to her family, it is Wang Yi's grace. Since He Hung said Bai Ji died of illness, then she had to give the appropriate response. Even Yin Lu, who was quick of the mouth, didn't say anything at the time. After Huang Yang left, she spoke with some fear, she's just gone. As a servant, you can't have multiple masters. Mu Jin sorted away the scissors that Chu Qingju placed on the table to prevent Chu Qingju from accidentally harming her hand. This way, it was very generous of Wang Ye. This type of thing, it wasn't just a life, it was possible to influence an entire family. Yin Lu didn't argue with the words. To her, all she had to do every day was serve Wang Fei well. She didn't have to think about anything else. She didn't want to think that much either. Chu Qingju propped her chin up with one hand and looked outside in boredom. In these days without a computer or phone, it was boring. She gave a yawn and drawled lazily, Mu Jin, find a storybook for me. Mu Jin retreated, but after a while, she didn't receive her novel, but Chu Qingju received a flower and gold printed invitation. The Jinan Princess Royal. Chu Qingju looked at the invitation in her hand. At the banquet, there had been a few princesses and daughters in the imperial family, most likely daughters of Wangs. One rank lower than Princess Gongju, Junju. But this Jinan princess, she had never met before. If her memory wasn't wrong, Jinan princess was the eldest daughter of Qingdi Emperor. Her birth mother had died, but she was adopted under the empress. The emperor had also decreed her the title of the Princess Royal. She had significant status within the womenfolk, but since she married down to the Count of Bailu, she moved to live in Jingzhou and rarely returned to Jing. The rumor was that the Count of Bailu and Jinan Princess Royal were deeply in love and had one son and daughter. She was the object of admiration from many of the women at court and was the epitome of husband of wife in many people's eyes. But why was she returning to Jin now, at a time that wasn't a festival and to hold a picture-admiring banquet? She looked at the beautiful flowery Ziokai script on the invitation. The invitation that was sent to the Wang Fu would have been personally written by Jinan Princess Royal. To see a person through their writing. This Jinan Princess Royal was a very talented woman. Personally writing a reply, Chu Qingju waited for the ink to dry before folding the paper. She passed it to Jin Zhan, who had been grinding the ink. Get someone to send it to the Princess Royal's Fu. At night, He Hung came to the Zheng Yuan. When the two finished eating the evening meal, Chu Qingju brought up the matter. He Hung wasn't very close to his Jija, but he did hear some rumors floating in Jing. 2 days earlier, the Princess Royal came back to Jing. You might have never met her before, but since the invitation has been sent, you can go. Chu Qingju gave him a cup of digestive tea. I already sent a reply. It's just that the picture-admiring banquet is 3 days later. The day after that would be the Lantern Festival. I was just surprised at the date that the Princess Royal had set down. When He Hung took the teacup, he took advantage and rubbed her hand. She glared at him half-heartedly. Has the Count of Bailu returned as well? He Hung shook his head. Haven't heard it. I've just heard that the Princess Royal came with her 2 children. Chu Qingju felt that there definitely had been something that happened. The Princess Royal returning before the Lantern Festival, with her children but not her Fuma. Nothing serious was occurring in Jing at this time. Why was she in such a rush? Was it that this Count of Bailu had done something and let down the Princess Royal? Because in this world, the people that were held as examples of matrimony usually would screw up. This was most likely the supposed the more loving, the faster you die. If the truth was like this, then it was very interesting that the Princess Royal was returning to the palace right now. Don't think too much. He Hung set down the teacup and reached with a hand to scrape Chu Qingju's nose. The Princess Royal is the most noble princess among my sisters. No one dare offend her. Chu Qingju instantly understood the meaning in these words. If the Count of Bailu really did let down the Princess Royal, if the Princess Royal was so angry and wanted to get revenge, then this Count of Bailu won't have a good outcome. She looked at He Hung. These words might not be actual concern for his sister, but it was very honest. Wang Ye is right, Chu Qingju smiled. I was overcomplicating it. Since it is already done, why don't you think about us? He Hung moved next to her body and gently bit her ear, like when should we prepare to sleep? Finishing, he pulled on the hairpin in her hair. Instantly, her hair poured down like a stream of water. Chu Qingju smiled at him. What is Wang Ye thinking now? He Hung felt that this stare was like a string, pulling him in. He carried her up in a lengthwise embrace. What I'm thinking, Qingju will know in a while. Chu Qingju laughed out loud into his chest. The second morning, Chu Qingju sat up in the bed. She looked at the scattered clothing on the bed, then at He Hung, who was dressing in front of the mirror before she lazily retreated back into her blankets. Seeing her wake, He Hung said, Today is the Lantern Festival, I'll take you out on the carriage to sightsee. Wang Ye, you have to keep your promise, Chu Qingju flipped around upon hearing this, propping her head up on one hand to look at He Hung. Then you need to come back early, I'll wait for you. I'll certainly return very early. He Hung walked to the bed and bent down to steal a kiss from her lips. He straightened and announced, I have to go to court. If you are tired, sleep a bit more. Finishing, his gaze swept ambiguously over the red marks on Chu Qingju's collarbone. Pulling the blankets to under her chin, Chu Qingju pointed outside and gently gave a snort. Wang Yet, you should be going to court now. Qi is still tired, and won't see you off. Finishing, she flipped around and left her back to He Hung. He Hung shook his head as he smiled and his mood was light as he went out the door. Chu Qingju slept for almost another 2 hours before lazily getting out of bed. She looked calmly on as the Yawan cleaned up the clothing under the bed. She sat at the mirror and drew her brows when she said, Jin Zhan, get someone to ask around what's going on with the Princess Royal. Jin Zhan bowed and left without a sound. Silently looking at the woman in the mirror, Chu Qingju raised the corners of her lips. Chapter 39 The Woman in the Rumors Part 2. The reason that the Princess Royal had suddenly returned to Jing was as Chu Qingju had expected. Something had happened. It really wasn't some unexpected incident. It was just an usually good man like the Count of Bailu had suddenly taken a fancy for a daughter of a little official and had wanted to take the person into the fu. Such a person like the Princess Royal didn't even argue with him and crisply sent somebody with the girl to return home. Who knew that the Count of Bailu was so angry he installed this person a mistress one outside? When the Princess Royal found out, she gathered her servants and tore down the residence that the Count of Bailu had outside. Then she took her children with her back to Jing. As to how the Count of Bailu was, the Princess Royal didn't care at all. Chu Qingju finished listening to the entire story and sighed, the love between husband and wife, it's just this. The daring that the Princess Royal had, a lot of it was based in the fact that she was the Emperor's daughter, that she was the Princess Royal of noble birth. If it was another woman who met such a thing, even if she left, who would help get justice for her? After Jin Zhan recited the story from beginning to end, she whispered, Newbie has also heard that the Emperor and Empress already know of the incident. The Emperor is very angry and has summoned for the Count of Bailu to come into Jing. A man like the Count of Bai, he hadn't really been in love. He was only wary of the status of the Princess Royal and hadn't met the woman that made his heart move. Now that he met a young and innocent girl, he forgot his wife, forgot his children and forgot his own identity. This kind of man, compared to those womanizers, was there a difference? When He Hung came back from court, his expression wasn't well. It looked like he also knew what had happened with the Princess Royal. In the future, when you go to the Princess Royal's residence, spend some time with her. When He Hung stopped, he gave a sigh, this Count of Bailu is too outrageous. Chu Qingju pretended to not have known already, what is it? He Hung instantly went silent for a beat before answering, he let down the Princess Royal. Fu Huang was very angry and summoned him back to Jing. Knowing that he didn't want to go into the details, Chu Qingju smiled and said, it's late, let's eat now. He Hung glanced outside before nodding. He affirmed, it's really not early anymore. After we eat, I'll take you out to see the lanterns. He was still thinking about this event and didn't want other people's happenings to affect the mood between the two of them. He then continued, there's going to be many people tonight. I've gotten someone to prepare a veil for you. It will be good to go for a walk. Chu Qingju revealed a smile, then let us eat quickly. I still have to change. The clothing she was wearing was beautiful, but it reached the floor and wasn't appropriate to go outside. Knowing that she wanted to go outside, He Hung smiled and agreed, yes. He turned and washed his hands, preparing to eat. The meal started with a small bowl of yuan xiao tu. Chu Qingju used half a bowl before randomly eating a few other dishes before she started to wash her hands and rinsing her mouth. When He Hung put down his chopsticks, she stood to go to the inner room to change. Holding a cup of digestive tea, the smile on He Heng's face grew deeper. Looking at the gradually darkening sky outside, He Heng ordered Jian Chong Xin and the others to prepare a carriage. Chu Qingju changed on a blue-green tight-girdled short dress. She styled her hair into a duoji. When she came out she saw He Heng sitting at the side drinking tea. She came forward and asked, "What does Wang Ye think of this?" He Heng saw the short dress in blue-green that she wore. It was different than the laziness she exuded usually. Like this, she seemed to have more of the lovable nature of a young girl, just like a tender flower but which became water with a pinch. "Very good," He Heng came forward to pull her hand, "let's go, it will start soon." Sitting on the carriage for a while, she found that it became gradually louder coming from the street as though they had entered a high-density area. But there wasn't anyone who blocked the carriage. The one they were riding in didn't have the symbols of the Wang Fu, but the people who could sit in a two-horse carriage, how low would their status be? After the carriage travelled for another while, it stopped. He Heng passed a veil to Chu Qingju, "Almost to the river, come down with me." Finishing, he got down the carriage first, holding a hand out to her. Chu Qingju gave her hand to him, allowing him to help her out of the carriage. She didn't know what the veil was made out of. Even though it seemed that a thin mist covered her view, she still could clearly see everything. Her hand was grasped in He Heng's, hidden in the other's wide sleeve. It felt a bit like the first romance between boy and girl as they came out to walk together. But Chu Qingju was very clear inside. She wasn't an innocent girl. And the other wasn't a youth in the middle of his first crush. By this time, both sides of the river shore was filled with beautiful lanterns. There were some stalls where lanterns were hung up for people to spend money and guess riddles. If they were right, they would receive a lantern as a gift. Behind the two of them were the Tajian and guards, all in common clothing, who didn't let other people crowd them. Passing through the busy crowds, Chu Qingju saw people take river lanterns as they walked towards the edge of the river and some children running around with animal lanterns. In this instant, her mood was very good. What has always been said to come, but has never really came? Wind. Clouds. Chu Qingju heard the exchange and couldn't help laugh out loud. He Heng saw she was very happy and asked, "What, does Qingju know?" This, placed in her previous life, it was a brain teaser that would be placed on the winter homework of elementary school children. "Of course I know," she turned to look at the people still guessing, "it's tomorrow." Hearing this answer, He Heng couldn't resist smiling, "That's correct." Behind him, he pulled on the veil and made it more secure on Chu Qingju. He then complimented, "Qingju is very smart." Finishing, he dragged her in front a stall. "Which one do you like?" He pointed at the lanterns hung above them. Chu Qingju followed his hand to look up. She pointed to a moon rabbit lantern and commented, "That bunny is very cute." He Heng motioned for the peddler to take down the moon rabbit lantern and check the tag hanging on the lantern. It was the first part of a couplet, and asked for the matching second half. Jian Chong Xin saw this and quickly gave money to the peddler to let his master guess the right answer to the couplet. "The rabbit's soul is connected to the silver sea." Chu Qingju recited the first line. She wasn't skilled at this topic, and didn't know if He Heng could give the answer. She prepared to look at the lanterns hanging elsewhere. "The crab's mountain receives the purple star." Three who knew that Chu Qingju hadn't even seen clearly what was hanging on the other lantern before she heard He Heng give the matching line. She raised an eyebrow and laughed, "So skilled." Just a simple couplet, He Heng took the moon rabbit lamp from the peddler and presented it in front of Chu Qingju, "For you." She took this lantern. Chu Qingju raised it and looked in examination for a while before replying, "Thank you Wang Ye." Seeing Chu Qingju like this lantern, the smile on He Heng's face became even more visible. It was just when he took a few steps, the smile on his face wasn't so natural anymore. Because he saw He Yuan was coming straight over in his direction. Beside him, there was a woman, but she wore a veil that disguised her appearance. It was obvious that He Yuan saw him. The two brothers both stopped in their steps before they walked near each other. Erge. He Yuan's gaze swept next to He Hung. He took his eyes back. Erge has such good spirits today. Sandy is as well. He Hung casually moved to the side, managing to hit half of Chu Qingju's body behind himself. Greetings to Duan Wang Fei. Just at that moment, the female next to He Yuan opened to speak. Hidden under the veil, Chu Qingju's eyebrow jumped. She paused for a beat before questioning, San Mei. Why was Chu Yusu walking together with He Yuan? What was the people of Changde Gongfu doing? Chapter 40 To Repay Grievances Fairly Part 1. Chu Qingju felt that she didn't understand what was going on. This era didn't treat women as strictly as the previous dynasty, but Chu Yusu had just reached her marriageable age of 15. She just casually walked with a Wang Ye that already had a wife on this public street. Wasn't it a bit inappropriate? She looked at the veil that the other was wearing. Her appearance was faintly unclear through the fabric, which would more easily cause others to speculate. She didn't want to involve herself in whatever Changde Gongfu was doing, so in the end she didn't say anything. It is Mimi. Chu Yusu's voice was as sweet as usually and had an extra hint of gentleness. She gave Chu Qingju a slight bow. I didn't think to be able to see Jija here. She had just called her Duan Wang Fei. After one call of San Mei, the other instantly changed appellations. In her voice, nothing of the conflict between Chu Qingju and Changde Gongfu could be heard, as though Chu Qingju was just her sister. Just a good festival, so I came out to see. Chu Qingju had no interest to chat in front of two Wang Ye and an unfamiliar woman. She replied coldly and didn't speak further. Chu Weisu saw she didn't want to speak and casually responded before stopping talking. She clearly was a perceptive person. This series of actions made Chu Qingju feel that it was a miracle that Liang Shi could raise such a daughter. It instantly became silent between the four people. Nobody spoke. Suddenly, a ball of fire exploded in the sky. Chu Qingju raised her eyes to watch. She saw the eye-catching spread of fire as she heard the cheers of people in her ears. Chu Yusu also raised her head, but she only saw the sparks as the fireworks faded. She had no desire to watch, so she turned her head to look at Rui Wang beside her. The other's handsome appearance caused her to slightly blush. Didi has a pleasure boat by the river. How about Erge and Sao come together on to see the river lanterns from there? He Yuan said calmly. It's rumored that the fireworks would be going on for 2 hours tonight. It wouldn't be as noisy on the boat. Erge, you can't disdain the boat for being too crude. Finishing, his face revealed a smile that held a hint of pride. Hearing the other mention the pleasure boat, He Hung knew this boat. It had been commissioned from the Ministry of Works specifically by Fu Huang for Lao San. He had never been on it, but he had heard people mention it. This boat had exquisite carvings all over. Since the other had the desire to boast, he couldn't reject. That's great. Erge hadn't had the chance to see Didi's boat. It's very fortunate to have met tonight. We'll have to disturb you. Finishing, he turned and held Chu Qingju's hand as he explained with a shallow smile, seeing the lights from the river, it has a distinctive flavor. Chu Qingju's index finger scratched his palm and nodded her head lightly. He Yuan looked at their close conjugal state and put his hands behind his back in disgust, moving his eyes away. On the side, Chu Yusu was deeply moved. A person like Daji who had such a dull personality, she was able to receive Duan Wang's affection. Even her personality was more outgoing than in the past. It could be seen just how great the influence Duan Wang had on her. A sense of admiration rose in her heart, a bit sour and a touch bitter. Changde Gongfu's days were one worse than the past one. So they thought to let her enter Rui Wangfu. Even if she couldn't become Zheng Fei, but after Rui Wang succeeded the throne, she could at least be a Fei. If she gave birth to a son, she might even have better fortune in the future. She had already accepted that she had to walk such a past, but seeing how Daji was able to hold hands and walk together with Duan Wang, her heart still felt ill. In this world, which girl didn't want to be wearing a phoenix crown and a red cape as they married? Why did they have to wear that mountain crow dress to become another man's shiki, and that man, she couldn't call him her husband. The guards at the two sides quickly pushed aside the surrounding crowds, leaving behind enough walking space for their masters. Chu Qingju and He Hung walked at the very front, a feeling akin a very important person was coming and onlookers had to leave. On the two sides of the road there were peddlers selling snacks. Yuan xiao, candy, and other foodstuffs. It had attracted many customers. She even saw a chubby child holding a bowl of hot sesame soup and wolfing it down. These fresh scenes caused her to smile. She pointed to a small stand selling sticky rice cake and commented to He Hung, Wang Yat, that cake has sesame seeds and peanut bits on it, it seems interesting. He Hung looked at the nondescript stand. The sellers were a normal couple, past their 60s, but they seemed very energetic. Foods outside aren't very clean, you can't eat too much. Finishing, he motioned for Qianchong Xin to go by. Qianchong Xin hurriedly walked to the small stand and gave a handful of copper to the owner. He even brought the bowl and spoon. Then he carefully held the sticky rice cake to He Hung, Wang Yat, Nikkei had them add extra peanuts. He Hung nodded and took the bowl to have a taste. The flavor was normal but there was some distinctive style. He held the bowl in front of Chu Qingju, here, if your stomach aches at night, don't blame me. I'm not that delicate. Chu Qingju didn't take the bowl and reached out with her left hand to hold the spoon to eat the cake. Her right hand slightly pushed aside the fabric of her veil in front of her face, totally treating He Hung like a servant of hers. Qianchong Xin saw the master and mistress walk even slower and silently lowered his head. He definitely didn't see Wang Ye taking pleasure in the act. After a few pieces of cake go into her stomach, Chu Qingju put down the spoon. She took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and commented, the flavor is good. I just saw someone selling tofu, but it's hard to eat and walk on the road. Get the food chef to make it for you. He Hung threw the bowl at Qianchong Xin and wiped his hands. He declared, you can only just taste the flavor with these, but they should be more finely crafted. Chu Qingju obediently nodded, acting like Wang Yat, you are right. I listen to you for everything. He Yuan, who had been following them the entire road, stayed silent. When he had saw He Hung hold the bowl for Chu Shi, he felt surprise. As one of the imperial sons and descendants of the dragon, they never served anyone else. This Chu Shi had some ability to let Erge be this happy in serving others. No wonder Mufei said she was a fox spirit. To wrap He Hung around her fingers, her tricks should be extraordinary. People said to marry a wife was marrying virtue. This wife that Lao had married, she probably wasn't a very worry-free one. Thinking of this, he raised his head to look at the backs of the two. This type of women, it would be better for her to be a beautiful Qi. They hadn't walked for 15 minutes when they reached the pleasure boat. At this harbor, there was only He Yuan's boat. It even had guards protecting it. The other pleasure boats were anchored far away, clearly afraid to even cause any chance of collision. He Yuan disregarded the guards as they bowed to him and ushered the couple onto the boat. As he led them inside, he informed, this boat has 2 levels, we'll go to the top. Chu Qingju found that even the handrail of the stairs was carved with pictures of mountains and rivers. The steps her feet rested on were made from high-quality red wood. Each step was as steady as she was walking on solid ground. He Hung walked at the front, carefully pulling Chu Qingju's hand as they went up. Only when they reached the top did he let go. The windows of the boat were open. Next to the window was a set of table and chairs. He Yuan ushered the two to sit, he himself sitting down by one side before he said to the still-standing Chu Yusu, Chu San Xiaoji, please sit. He knew the idea that Chang de Gongfu had. He didn't have any interest in this third daughter, but if he took Duan Wang Fei's Mimi as Qi, what would Lao Er's face look like? His good Erge was in love with Wang Fei, so he thought he wouldn't be angry at her. Chu Qingju sat beside the window, looking at the surface of the river as it turned red due to the lanterns on both shores. She used a hand to prop her chin as she admired the scenery. Occasionally, there were lotus lanterns that floated by, the candle in the middle fluttering, creating another kind of beauty in the night. In the cold night, a guest has come with such urgency that tea has to substitute for wine. The water started boiling in the bamboo pot, the fire crimson red and hot. He Yuan raised a teacup. Sao, why don't you taste this boat's tea? Chu Qingju heard his words and felt this couple of Rui Wang both had the habit of wanting people to taste tea. A person like her that didn't have much learning in tea, the thing she disliked most was hearing this type of question. She raised the veil, revealing an ivory chin. Chu Qingju smiled as she took a sip and then she lowered her veil, elegantly putting the cup back on the table. Simple and elegant, the taste lingers in the mouth. He put down the teacup and smiled. He praised, Sandi has such leisurely days. Can't find good things like this. Recently I don't have to go to court, so naturally I will spend more attention on these things, He Yuan said with a mirthless smile. Has busy duties, there's no attention left for these common things. Seeing the other mention the court, He turned his head to look outside the window. He turned his head back to say, Sandi is joking. Fu Huang is just angry momentarily. Once Sid has uncovered the truth, I'm afraid Sandi will be busy with the court again. I hope Sid can return soon, and wash away the accusations again. Did he? He Yuan gave a seemingly helpless sigh. He turned and said to Chu Yusu, who had stayed silent by one side, I've heard that San Ziages is exceptional at the qin. Is it possible for this small Wang to hear a song? Under the veil, Chu Yusu's face froze. After a slight pause, she put down the teacup in her hands. With a light voice she said, an inelegant song, hope everyone doesn't laugh. Finishing, she walked to sit behind the qin. When she plucked the chords, notes rang out. The smile on He Heng's face didn't change, but he looked down even more at the people of Changde Gongfu. Now, Qingju was doing Wang Fei. Chu Yusu, as her sister, was willing to play music for Rui Wang. A daughter of a Gongfu, she was rushing to become a Kishi. He didn't know if it shamed Qingju or the reputation of Changde Gongfu. Chu Yusu's skills were good. Chu Qingju listened and had a deeper understanding of the arrogance of He Yuan. He could, in front of her as his Sao, let Chu Yusu play for him. That was clearly saying that he didn't even put any importance on He Heng and his Sao. Arrogant people usually died early. Chu Qingju smiled icily. Just this type of tactics, and he wanted to be emperor. He was delusional. And this Changde Gongfu, it was too shameless. Thankfully the entire Jing city knew that she, as Duan Wang Fei, wasn't close to Changde Gongfu. Otherwise, if they didn't care about humiliating themselves, she cared. Chu Yusu played a famous song called Clouds over Xiao and Xiangjiang rivers. Some thought this was a song lamenting the present and reminiscing on the past, but others felt this song just simply described the scenery. No matter what, this song required very high skills. If there were any weakness, they couldn't play the meaning in the song. Chu Qingju wasn't an expert in the guqin, but as a former dancer, she did have a sense of music. At least she could hear, that when Chu Yusu was playing this song, her mood wasn't as good as imagined. San Ziaji's skills are as extraordinary as said. He Wang listened for a while before continuing to drink tea. He suddenly remarked, Sao's skills must be extraordinary as well. These words overstepped. Chu Qingju smiled rather than get angry. The motion she made as she set down the teacup was heavier than before. She retorted icily, San Shu does indeed have lots of leisure time. No wonder you would pay attention to such insignificant matters. These words were very impolite, it didn't leave behind any coverings for He Yuan. Sitting by her side, He Heng didn't speak, clearly feeling that there was nothing wrong with what Chu Qingju had just done. He Yuan's face showed an astonished expression. When he had finished speaking, he had already detected it wasn't proper, but he was used to being brash, and didn't expect that this Sao would be so impolite. A flame burned in his heart. He looked at He Hung and saw the other's expression wasn't very good. He could only raise his teacup. It's Diddy that transgressed, Sao, please forgive me. Chu Qingju lazily raised her teacup. San Chu is too polite. But she didn't drink the tea. A sliver of a smile appeared on He Heng's face. He raised the teacup and said to He Yuan, San Di, this tea isn't wine. Don't get intoxicated. His woman, she showed have this daring. If she had to silently suffer such a thing, where did it put him as the husband? He Yuan squeezed out a smile and took a drink, but he felt that the tea in his mouth was bitter and harsh, the fire in his heart unable to be doused.